Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I have with me a very, very, very special guest, somebody that I have a feeling that we're going to come to this cathartic moment where we're going to be like, man, I wish we knew each other 10 years ago. And then we would have these, webs of synergistic profundity and alliances that would have met or maybe met the last 3 years with much more power and all sorts of amazingness. But I have with me Alison Elsberry, a former pediatric OT, occupational therapist, and former craniosacral therapist turned New Earth parenting guide and educator, the creator of Embodied, Brilliance, and Brilliant and Barefoot. I love the word brilliant, by the way. It's something that I've used for a long time. I believe we're all made brilliant, and I believe that our kids, especially if given the greatest opportunity to be that way, they will express genius and brilliance in ways that will just keep us dumbfounded. I believe that to also be why the last 3 years are so important, because I believe that they collective cartel, collective, whatever you want to call them, have always targeted our kids. And I think it's because of much of what we're going to talk about today. But Alison, before I go too far, I would love our audience to get to know you both personally and professionally. And yeah, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be awesome.
Perfect. Well, again, thanks for having me here, and just want to give a warm hello to everyone. And I'm Alison, and as you said, I'm a former pediatric OT, craniosacral therapist, and I've been called many loving names, and the one that sticks the most is New Earth parenting guide and educator. What I am most passionate about and devoted to in this lifetime is creating educational experiences for children and families that teach them to really honor and nurture the body as sacred. So I've created two New Earth, and by New Earth, I just mean a different way of viewing the body and the soul as one. Educational pathways that really help children feel at home in their body as a divine being, because I really see what these New Earth kids are asking for, and they're asking for new ways to be educated. And I really truly see that the body and learning how to be in the body is a child's true educational pathway.
Wow.
So how I got into all of this was, I guess you could say, as a child, I was extremely curious about all things body related. When we would go to the library as a kid, I wasn't the kid that wanted to go pick out like a book and like take an adventure through a story. I went straight to the encyclopedias and the anatomy books, trying to figure out what the heck was inside my body and how do I get in it, and like how I feel in it. That's all I wanted to know about. So I always had this profound curiosity about, how does my body work, and how am I feeling in it, and how come no one's like really talking about this when I go to school? And I remember a very specific moment when I was in 4th grade thinking, why are we learning about math, but how come no one's really talking to me about how I'm feeling, or what my body's doing, or what it's capable of, or the miraculous healing capacity, that it has. And it was in that moment that I realized, oh, I'm just supposed to like memorize everything and regurgitate it. And that's like how I'm supposed to just kind of excel in school. And I realized this is a game. And like in that moment at 8 or 9 years old, I felt like I kind of like figured it out. Oh, just excel the best that you can in that moment. And I don't think I'm going to learn these things. And what brought me into being an occupational therapist and learning about it was the love of the body and really wanting to understand from a psychological and emotional aspect, like how is the physical connected with the spiritual and the emotional? And so that's like what really started to open the doorway into these pathways. And then when I first became an OT, I was getting all these families that were coming through the clinic, and even in the school systems that I partnered with. And the parents had these amazing questions about their children's spiritual gifts, and they would just literally walk up to me in the middle of the clinic. I don't know why, but I just feel like I can come and ask you this question about my child. They're talking about past life experiences, or they're having dreams and visions, and I just don't know what to do. And, I realized, okay, there's a really bigger ask, that's going on here. And I just had this way of bridging that gap of communication between parents and their children, and
That's
helping
awesome.
the parents understand this is what's going on for them on the soul level, and this is what they're saying, and this is what they're like really asking for. And then it just evolved over time. And how I came to create those two beautiful educational pathways was really, I feel like, the children's souls asking for this.
Wow.
It wasn't something that I naturally, consciously set out to do. It was something like a trend, a theme, a reoccurring, something that I just couldn't ignore.
Yeah.
After 20 something years, it was like, here it is again. Children's souls are asking, how do I land my light here in this physicality in a way that feels meaningful and authentic to who I am? And I didn't see anything like that being created. So I was like, okay, we're going to create solutions to this.
That's wonderful. It's interesting that you bring up like 8, 9 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you're going to go a little bit deeper, and I want you to go deeper into this. But in my practice, I would say over the last 5 years, and it's something about when you get to a certain stage of practice where you like really, really, really know your stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, it also is that moment where hopefully you also get equally as humble, to be more curious. That I started to teach when maybe 7 to 10-year-olds started to come in. Instead of teaching the parents, I started teaching to the kids,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about self-healing, talking about the regenerative capabilities of the body, how, just talking about the miracle that they are. And also just being very like clear, like from a nervous system, I'm a chiropractor, so a nervous system perspective, how the system is just made to self-heal and self-regulate. And it's quite remarkable how quickly they get it. They just get it so fast, and they don't maybe have to go through the unlearning, that many of us adults have to. And then in the end, it's almost a given that the child will be very much the most convicted and the most committed to anything that we may recommend or suggest, or obviously if it feels right for them. And they're just like, well, and it's not an authoritarian dictatorial, well, Dr. Stan said to do this, so I'm going to do this. It's more of just like, it's a knowing, and it's almost like they're ready for this information. So I appreciate you sharing that similar kind of catalyst or realization, because it just lines up perfectly with how I do things too, or how I've noticed them too.
Mm. Yeah. And I think part of what you're talking about too is the solidification of the personality, right? And the subconscious mind.
Right.
There's that neurological shift from the brainwave state, so that makes a really deep impact. And children's frontal lobes are coming more, online, and they can start to make more choices for themselves. in a lot of ways as well. And they start to like really see, I'm an individual soul moving around in this world, and, I can create what feels really good for me.
So tell me a little bit about, I'm always interested in people's inspirations, right? Like you've shared just how many of the children in your world, not just your practice, but the schools, and like how they helped you realize that there was a new path, right? There was a new offering, there was a new educational experience that they were maybe yearning for. How did you, how do you feel like you came to where you are today? I mean, it's interesting, you
Mm.
shared that you listened to or somebody in your world shared one of our episodes with you. And honestly, I was looking at that episode and I was like, I think that's one of my, maybe one of my spicier ones, one of the ones that I kind of just, I, people have, not listeners, but people have maybe criticized me for using the word enslave. And honestly, I have no qualms about it at this point, because I believe that's just exactly what the cartel is essentially doing, especially to our kids. But I'm interested in maybe a bigger picture, like inspiration, but also like what maybe through that episode led you to reach out so quickly.
Mm. I remember just feeling my heart having this big yes, yes, and nodding my head and so agreeing with what you were saying and wanting to just like so wholeheartedly contribute to the conversation and offer perspective
Great.
that maybe, parents haven't yet considered, you know? And I feel like what's really led me to this point is some of the unique gifts that I have is this ability to see these invisible imprints that are impacting our children,
Mm.
right? It's like kind of putting a finger on the pulse of what's not being said and then giving it voice and doing it in a way that is in integrity, but that also is honoring of each individual's perspective of where they might be coming from, right? Just kind of offering a different way of looking at something and not making it right or wrong, but just saying, hey, have you ever considered this? This is what I am seeing, children asking for. And here's an interesting perspective that maybe you want to know about. So for me, it's really about aligning and collaborating, partnering, having conversations like this with people who are of like heart and mind, who are really passionate about getting information out there that is of the highest light, right? That is reverberating with truth. And we know it when we feel it in the cells of our body. Like when I was listening to your episode and I was shaking my head, yes, 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 like agreeing with you, but then also like really feeling the truth of something, and not denying it.
And specifically, you mentioned an issue with milestones.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Tell
Yes.
me about that.
Yeah. So our traditional developmental milestones, as people would know them. So I'm listening to your episode and thinking, I don't know if people actually see developmental milestones or would even equate developmental milestones with the word enslavement,
Mm.
or even developmental milestones as being something we need to take a look at. Because developmental milestones are something that I like to say is hidden in plain sight. It's like it's so just the everyday norm of what we've been fed, what we've been programmed with, what we've been educated on, that we just take it at such face value that we don't know to question, where did these developmental milestones come from? How were they created? Why were they created? And how are they actually really impacting my child's relationship with their body
Mm.
and my consciousness and psyche as a parent? And then why would someone even want to know that, right? So this is what I mean by looking at some of these invisible imprints that to
Totally.
me are really obvious just because I've seen it in so many kids over the years saying, yeah, I can't conform. This isn't going to work for me. And
Gotcha.
so, really creating more awareness around developmental milestones being one area of child development that's really asking for our attention to be looked at from a very different point of view.
And what do you tell me more?
Mm,
What do you suggest?
yeah. So when I'm talking about how I've created educational experiences that really honor and nurture a child's body as sacred, and if I'm saying and sharing the viewpoint of that's what I see children are really asking for is that help being in the body and staying connected to their light and having that source of consciousness open and staying connected with their own body, knowing that they're a soul in physical form, looking at where are all the places where that's not being nurtured, where the body's not being honored or sacred as sacred, or a child's individual expression isn't being seen or heard in the way that they're asking for it to be. And I started to see developmental milestones as this big blinking light in my own consciousness saying, I've got to talk about how developmental milestones were created and how they actually can be viewed as a system or structure that isn't really supporting this next generation of children to really grow and develop. Or I guess I would say it's not nurturing developmental freedom, which is what they're actually really asking for.
Gotcha.
Not to be measured by a standard or a curve that says they're ahead or behind something, or something that says they should be doing X, Y, and Z by this time frame. But yet the way that that's all been packaged and presented to parents and handed to people is that that's what we're supposed to believe is possible for human development on this planet, when children are clearly showing us actually there's something outside of this model and system that's not working anymore, and this is what I want to show you.
Gotcha. Tell me how they were developed.
Yeah, so certain systems and organizations got together and I guess you could say, did different types of research and created what we call ages and stages. So we associate certain ages with certain abilities. And those certain ages and stages were created as a way to then give parents a preconceived timeline and idea of what the child should be doing. So then what happens is if a child's not meeting that developmental milestone in that certain age range or in the way that a parent thinks that should be happening, it causes fear, anxiety, confusion, freakouts, parents feeling lost, not knowing what to do and thinking that there might be something wrong or off about their children. And they were originally created to create and mold together literally a certain type of human that was meant to go into the public school system and be indoctrinated and trained in a very, specific, not as free forward thinking mind, and then be put in, to the human rat race society, right?
Gotcha.
Of this is what I need to be doing at this point so that I can receive this information in school so that I'm lining up to the whole cultural program of I have to then go to college and then I have to get a 9 to 5 job and then I've got to do this and that and that. Just the whole programming of what we've been fed about what we think life has to look like, or how we think we should be feeling, moving, and thinking about it as we move throughout our day.
Gotcha. Tell me, so I don't know if I'm connecting all of your thoughts right now. My maybe you can give me more of a specific, like, is there a particular milestone that would relate to how some child would be then indoctrinated into the system by a specific age? My thought on developmental milestones is what I don't like about them. What I don't like about them is how they have essentially said that children are not supposed to crawl, right? Like they're just
Yes.
not supposed to crawl anymore. And so are well, I understand there's a spectrum of normal. My view is that there is a normal and there is an optimal that is often very different from what these milestones would then, essentially lay out for our kids. I think they tend to be the lowest common denominator, and they tend to push kids into maybe some of your previous services,
Yeah.
which then tends to be a merry-go-round of OTPT speech that tends to not have a root cause focus in any capacity.
Right.
But I'm not, I guess something that are you saying that there should be no milestones at all? Or are you saying that, yeah, I'm curious if you could.
Yeah, I love this clarifying question,
Yeah.
because in a lot of ways, I am being very radical in saying what would happen if we lived in a world where there were no developmental milestones that children had to achieve at all. But if it was actually children given the space to really just develop at their own pace, their own rhythm, in the way that's authentic to who they are.
Gotcha.
And to educate parents not on the age and when they should be doing something, but rather, what does movement sequence look like in the nervous system? Like, so for instance, holding the head up comes before being able to roll over. Rolling over to either side and front and back comes before being able to sit up, and things like that. So the normal progression of movement and what a soul looks like moving in the body versus my child is 9 months and should be doing this, or my child's 3 years old and so should be doing this.
Totally.
So what I'm saying is looking at how the ages with things and how they've been associated with certain movements. What if we just took like literally like a label, just peel it off, put that aside, and let the true developmental freedom of that soul having that experience in that body show us what they are truly infinitely capable of doing and being.
Gotcha.
And so when I'm talking about certain milestones correlating with certain abilities in the school system that need and want to be in place. So say like having a hand dominance and being able to write your name, because you need to be able to do that in kindergarten and then in first grade, or being able to, read by age 7 or 8, because they need to be able to, get into second or third grade, or some of the other things, that can happen using scissors, or being able to solve a complex math problem, things like that.
Gotcha.
At those certain developmental capacities, what's happening in the nervous system is that child's soul is having the opportunity to unify more fully within the body. It's not a time where we have to ask that child's soul, I need you to be able to write your name because you're this many years, like those types of things aren't really honored. But the way the school system has been set up, and I'm not picking on the school system, it's just the system that we all know and that most of us went through. and have had some type of impactful experience with. The way that that system is set up is extremely linear. And nothing in child development, in my humble opinion, is linear, especially with these beautiful new earth souls that are coming onto the planet. They're very multidimensional. And so their development doesn't look linear, and it doesn't ask to be looked at from a narrow state of mind, from a linear aspect like that. But the way that the school system has been set up has come from a very different dimension of thinking. And so it asks children to be doing something by a certain age so that they can keep advancing forward and then eventually graduate and enter society to then move on and, you know, perhaps fall into the programming that maybe some of us fell into when we got out of school. Oh, that means I have to go to college and then get a 9 to 5 and do this and do that. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong about that. I'm giving the perspective of these newer souls that are coming in are asking for something drastically and radically different than what is already here on this planet that's been created.
I agree with you. I think I would explain it a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, I look at it almost like being intelligent, right? Wildly intelligent, wildly infinitely brilliant, that our system has hyper, I don't want to say objectified. That's not even the right word. But I totally get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying because we then only look at the thing, right? The act, the milestone, and the timeline. And when you only look at the act and the timeline, then you, one, dehumanize the child. Two, you may miss something wildly more important, right? Like if they crawl by 6 months,
Yeah.
but they didn't roll both ways. They didn't nurse on both sides. They didn't actually sit and get into a seated position on their own. And they, you could teach a child to walk before 1 year old or whenever they're supposed to, right?
Right.
But just because you check that block doesn't necessarily mean that they are on time or that they are normal or that they are optimal, or like you're saying, that they are expressing this inborn brilliance. I want to ask you another question because I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure. Do you find that if you remove all of these kind of hyper linear, rigid milestones, that they progress maybe even far faster than we ever would have thought they would, because they've been allowed to be more free in the journey of their own development?
100%.
Yeah, beautiful.
100%. And that's a friend and colleague and I were talking about this the other day, and she used the term developmental freedom. And I'm like, that's exactly it.
Yeah, I love it.
And that's what really nurtures their brilliance, because then they're not feeling. Kids are so good at picking up on the invisible imprints too, right? And if they feel that pressure from an external source or system that says, oh my gosh, I got to be doing this by that, but oh, there's no way that's going to happen because I'm feeling all this pressure to be able to be doing that. And then all of a sudden that pressure is relieved. And they have the true space and freedom to then be like, oh, wow, I'm going to bloom and blossom and show you what my true brilliance is. And then that expression is what's absolutely 100% perfect for their experience of being in a physical body.
It's crazy, right? It's crazy because I would say that I tend to think logically. I tend to think stepwise, right? Like a child, you could put them in a bumbo chair don't put them in a bumbo chair.
Yes, yes.
I will go ahead and say, yeah, I'll go and be a little bit more forward than you. And I will say that the conventional educational system, love our teachers, love our administrators, love the people who approach every day with a servant's heart, but the rigidity, the square peg round hole is crushing our children. I don't think that's arguable today. We're seeing the mass exodus out of the public school systems, out of the private school systems, and into homeschool because one, like you're saying, kids are calling for it, but two, parents are seeing it now clear as day.
Yeah.
Things like bumbo chairs, things that force kids or allow kids or give kids the convenience to sit before they're actually developmentally ready for that, or have actually intelligently and brilliantly moved into that position themselves, will train them to sit, but they will always have some sort of challenge because of their own neurology, won't be allowed to logically move through and intelligently move through the way that we're made to. What I wanted to express, because I have some parents who maybe think a little bit more linearly to some degree, that you aren't necessarily saying that there that there should never be ever any understanding of that linear or that logical or that intelligent aspect of their developmental cycle. I would say that you're maybe even more intricate in understanding how that process is, and maybe even more understanding that if a child has, they're crawling, right? But they slightly tripod on one side versus the other, right? Or they slightly butt scoot, that Huggies says is okay because they make cute commercials about it, that you should probably pay attention to something, right? It's not like you're not saying don't pay attention to the child who may be doing something that is potentially just off from what our design is. I would say maybe you're even thinking more so like we should be looking at these types of things because of our inherent brilliance. I'm not sure.
Great question. And I would say it's all about the intention in which you approach everything.
Great.
If you're curious, if you remain curious as a witness and as an observer to your child's experience versus, I think there's something wrong and we need to fix that or make it better. Those are two very different energies, and children immensely feel that. So developmental freedom works on both ends of the spectrum. The child's a part of that and asking, hey, can you take some of this pressure, that these systems and structures are trying to place on me and my system right now? I need you, mom and dad, to kind of unplug from what you think I should be doing when.
Yep.
But then there's the opposite end of the spectrum for the parents to kind of meet the child there in the middle and say, I'm just going to witness who you are being as a light body and form.
Gotcha.
And I'm going to be curious if I see something that has me go, huh? And instead of maybe getting freaked out, scared, confused, and think that something needs to be fixed about it, because that is the typical programming that parents are targeted with and given when a child is not meeting a developmental milestone. But to recognize that when it's happening and say, oh, wait a second, maybe they're just showing me that they're needing a little bit more extra support with something.
Yeah.
And that it's okay.
Yeah.
And becoming from that place. Kids feel the energetic intention of everything.
It's almost like it can, when there's such a rigidity or right or wrong or broken / fix it mentality, it also comes with fear. It also comes with like a sense of like that obligatory sense of shame and guilt and things like that get leveraged all through our healthcare and educational systems to some degree. So tell me more about what because I believe I believe these to be some of the biggest challenges that our kids face today. And I believe that we are ill prepared as a society to meet them where they are. But I feel like there is this deep sense of purpose and mission and creativity behind the work that you're doing. And I'd love to hear more about what that is.
So can you clarify, like?
Sure. Maybe
Yeah.
more directly, tell me about your Brilliant and Barefoot and Embodied Brilliance as a whole. You know, what you're at work with. Yeah.
Yeah. So over the years, what I was seeing, and now what I realized I was doing as a pediatric OT, was really helping children be in their body.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the words I would have chosen at that time. And what I began to actually really see was that the way that I approached every session, every interaction with a child was changing. And it was moving from goal-oriented activity to have them be able to do this, or that, so that they can fit in here. And I started to see, what if I just approach this as I'm simply offering an activity that can support them in connecting with their body. And it doesn't matter what it looks like to me or to anyone else, but what is their experience? And so I began to get really curious with how I was interacting, particularly with children, and making sure I wasn't coming from that same programming of, oh, I have to fix it. They're coming to me because the script on the piece of paper said OT eval, diagnose and treat for developmental delay, which, by the way, was probably the most popular diagnosis or label that I saw, was developmental delay, developmental delay, developmental delay. Very, very popular.
Probably because insurance would pay for it.
Exactly.
Did I say that? Did I say that out loud? Okay, got it.
Yeah. And part of what took me away from the traditional educational model and traditional medical matrix was I started to be connecting with children in such a profound way that I couldn't find billing codes to describe what I was even doing. And I was like, okay, I'm on to something here. Like, this is something very profoundly different. And so when I left those systems behind, very gracefully, and I started to really kind of play with what had started coming through and what I was really learning from the children I was working with, particularly babies, what I started to see was that they just wanted to know that their body was part of their human existence. Like, it was a meaningful part of who they are. And they just wanted it to be included and honored, and literally, like I said, honored as something sacred. Yeah, it's like, this is a meaningful part of my divinity. Please see my body as part of my spirit. The two are not separate. And so that's something that I learned, growing up as a child and healing from that in my adult years. And I just was really profoundly moved by the requests that I was really seeing, what children were really asking for. And I started to be in meditation and prayer and just ask, what are some of the solutions that we can really bring forth onto the planet to, like, really meet this need for children? And what I really started to see was that there needed to be an awareness of a child even having a body, and realizing that there's sensation and emotion and things swirling about that happens in their physical form. And that awareness of their body actually precedes social emotional learning, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, on and on. Those things are all valid, but they all require a very particular skill, which is, I have a physical space in which all of that happens in.
Right.
And that's what I was seeing was missing out of educational environments. And I was like, okay, so how do we keep a child connected to their soul and to their spirit and honor and treat that as part of the body? And so that's why I developed Embodied Brilliance and Brilliant and Barefoot.
The I don't want people to miss this. This is something that I have been communicating to our community, especially our practice, for over a decade. I don't know why I tend to be the only person that mentions this. We're a prenatal chiropractic practice, and we talk about gestation, and we talk about, we could get super clinical and super sciencey, but sometimes, like, I just let people know, especially new moms, especially first time moms, like two half cells to 26 billion cells in 9 months, and no one has to consciously think about that, right? Like, and
Yeah.
it's 50,000 neural connections per second that program, which could be a hyper, rigid word, but it's this divine programming that these primitive reflexes that develop in baby very intelligently and very logically before baby's born affords them the opportunity to sleep, poop, eat, function optimally when they're born, be an integrated, intelligent, active participant in the birthing process these primitive reflexes allow for, that when babies are born, we have this hyper linear milestone. If it's not matching this perfectly, then go to this provider because something's broken and they need to, from the outside, and fix your child, when in reality, how do I say this? It's almost like this, right? We have some doulas who are supposed to be holistic, who are supposed to be, I'm not saying I love doulas. I don't ever want to like marginalize one particular, but we have some doulas that say, don't carry your baby too much because your baby might get spoiled, right? There's still that philosophy that pediatricians have, conventional medical doctors, old parenting styles. But no one talks about how, like, the first system that develops in a baby is the nervous system, and the first system of the nervous system is your vestibular system. And like Gabor Mate, medical doctor, Thomas Verney, medical doctor, these developmental, I imagine, would be consistent with this developmental freedom perspective that you have, would say every baby for eons of time needs to be not just held, not just nurtured, maybe worn ad nauseum sometimes for a mom, because they sometimes need our nervous systems to create some sort of balance and some sort of safety and some sort of integration for their nervous systems to navigate the earth plane, because they've just arrived. It's such a wild experience. And I wanted to go down that route because I want people to realize that what you're talking about, Alison, is really, really, really important, because it flies in the face of a lot of parenting philosophies today. And I imagine many of us many of you who are listening might not quite understand all of what we're talking about, but the essence and the core of it, which I hope you explain maybe more so with your actual offerings, maybe answers some of those deeper questions that maybe parents didn't know that they and their children had.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love what you just articulated about that sacred connection time and being held. Our nervous systems are hardwired for connection. Being in a body is a big adjustment for a child's soul and for their light. And especially that first year of life, they're really recalibrating and learning how to anchor their light into their own body. Holding your baby constantly, if that's the word that wants to be used, but just having that touch and connection, it's not just about co-regulation. It's meeting the first core developmental need of love and connection that we all have. And so many of what adults go back and heal as part of developmental trauma is exactly that. Developmental trauma could be looked at the extent to which our needs were or were not met, how well they were or were not met,
Totally.
or are or not being met. And a lot of babies really do have what's the word I'm looking for here? An exquisite amount of desire to be held, right? To be reassured, to have that physical closeness and connection, because it's not only reassuring to the nervous system, but it honors that first core developmental need of love and connection. And it actually brings their codes, their original codes of belonging online. Like, that's how we're hardwired.
Great.
So I love that you bring that up. How that inspired me to create Embodied Brilliance and Brilliant and Barefoot was through understanding that the nervous system is actually the window between the soul and the body. And if we think of the body as the book for the way that our soul tells its story, and the soul being the love story that we're here to tell about who we are, our nervous system is the window, the translator of how that happens. And if we look at all of our 7 bodily senses, so sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, body awareness, and movement, they each have a language in which a child expresses who they are. And that shows up through certain quirks, behaviors, emotions, sensitivities, gifts, abilities. And when we can become fluent in that language and understand how the senses are actually really speaking the language of the soul, it can tell us, this is what my child's needing help with and being in their body. This is where they're needing help with knowing how they're feeling in this moment. This is where they're needing help with this skill or gift or ability, or this is where they're needing more support in feeling their feelings. It could be a number of different things. That's how I created Embodied Brilliance, was taking some of the science of what I saw as an OT in sensory integration, because that was my specialty, sensory integration, and looking at, actually, this is about soul integration and how do we help children move into that aspect of being who they are in physical form. So that's how I created Embodied Brilliance, was through basing it on the 7 bodily senses and how they help children embody and express their soul.
That's great.
Brilliant and Barefoot was created after after Embodied Brilliance, but it's actually what I call the prequel to Embodied Brilliance. It comes before Embodied Brilliance, and it's all about, as you can probably guess from the title, a child's feet, and how our feet are the doorway into the whole body, and how our feet are intimately connected to the earth, and why that matters for our whole midline and orientation of all the reflexes that you were just talking about, and to the development of our senses, but more importantly, to a child having an orientation to their own core, their own sense of self, so that they're actually getting to know and love and trust who they are and move about in this world knowing who they are, so that they can make decisions and choices from that place of knowing who they are. So I see what I've created as foundations to being human, because if we're not having an understanding of how to be in our body and how to be connected with it and how to navigate the sensations that arise in that experience, then it becomes very hard to know how to relate to everything external in the outside world and to move about in the world in ways that feel really healthy and really nourishing. And I wasn't seeing any of this being addressed in early childhood or in the educational system. And so I've just been really inspired to create just these new educational pathways where learning how to be at home in a body is a child's educational pathway.
Yeah.
And all of the developmental freedom that we're talking about and the milestones, if that's what we really want to call them, happen naturally as a result when we're supporting children to really be who they are in physical form.
I almost and maybe I'm off base here, but are you essentially saying, because this is how I see it, give me any diagnosis that you may place upon a child, give me any label, any what they in my profession have said, alphabet soup sometimes, right? ADHD, ASD, you name it, ODD, PDD. And you could relate that back to some dissonance between a child's soul and their own embodiment, like a disconnection between who they are spiritually and who they are supposed to manifest materially in this world. But take that back further, that milestones, which often lead to the further on diagnosis, can also just be more understood in terms of some sort of disconnect between that spiritual body, that spiritual being able to manifest and present itself in physical form.
Absolutely.
And essentially both programs, one is geared more towards younger kids and one's just maybe a more broad understanding of just how our senses, I think you said 7, most people understand 5. The lenses that I've studied, that there's, I think, upwards of 109 different senses that hit our nervous system
Absolutely.
at any given moment.
Yeah.
Like most people understand, the 5 senses, but there's proprioception. There's also like heat, hunger, all sorts of different senses that hit our nervous system. That all has to be like this orchestra. It's got to be in harmony. It's got to be symphonic. And if it's not, it may manifest symptomatically as a blank label, right? Or if you actually had a lens and a framework and an understanding of what some of these signs and symptoms at a root cause level may be, trying to help your kid communicate. Because my kid's 3, my oldest is 3. And some days you're like, wow, the most brilliant child that exists on the planet. And some days you're just like, what is up? Like something is up. And it's rarely the loudness. It's rarely the behavior. It's almost never the emotion as much as it is what she's trying to tell me. And I can't tell you how often it is some sort of disconnect between her soul and her body, for sure.
That's right. Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah. The senses, like I said, are this amazing, magical, immaculate language, really, that help us understand. They're simply cues and clues, to us adults to better understand what's going on with my child and what are they needing in this moment, what's happening in this moment. And then being able to really be present to a parent's own sensation of what's happening in their body as response to what's going on in their child's body, things like that. I often joked for a few years that there needed to be a class, or like some way to greet babies when they're born into the world, and reminding them, like, you are a soul and you have a body and you have sensations, and this is part of what being in a body means. And you may not like all those sensations, and sometimes it might feel hard to navigate through all of that and to make sense of that, but we're here to support you and we're here to help you. And for children to make sense of their own senses and understand who they are, it starts with having an awareness of their own physicality. There's something really interesting that happens prior to even babies being conceived in the preconception body. That 3 or 4 month time period, that's happening before a child is conceived. It's that energy field of what mom's experiencing, what dad is experiencing, what grandparents are bringing into the relational field. And then that web of energy or that relational field is what contributes to the development of the physical body in utero. That's what we call the preconception body in pre and perinatal psychology, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So anything can happen in that relational field and really deeply impact how we are feeling in utero. And that can impact how our senses take shape and form, right? And then when we come into the world and come through the birth portal, that's a whole nother experience, right?
Yeah.
And then most babies are asking to be intimately held, right? And want physical connection and contact and the acknowledgement, that they've just been through this amazing birth experience.
Tell me, I appreciate you sharing that, because I would be remiss if we didn't talk about what the hell is happening, right? Over the last 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
there is this seemingly endless chaos, this unbridled, launching of fear and anxiety, the media, you name it, even within the movement, right? Even within the freedom kind of focused movement, there's a ton of clickbait. There's a ton of things that get us all amped up. And there isn't really a lot of resources to help us integrate and to ground ourselves. But I'm curious, just based on what you said, like this whole kind of this preconception energetic field that is obviously drawing into the world these beings at this stage that I've shared, I think maybe in our first 10 episodes, like the deep sense of purpose that I believe babies are here for today. I'm interested in two things. One, because I'm interested in one thing. What is the possibility for humanity, given the understandings that you can offer the world, right? Because I think we know the gravity of the fallout without some sort of way to reconcile that we are, and this is like an adage in this kind of spiritual kind of healing perspective, which is this is inarguable, probably with both Alison and I, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are a spiritual entity having a rather material experience that we have to navigate. And so the fallout is all the shit that we've seen, right? The chronic illness, the delays, the diagnoses in our kids, the unbridled use of pharma, the rigid box that we're trying to shove all of our round pegs in for our kids that eventually lead them to a cog in a wheel of this industrial complex, right? We know we know the end game of the Matrix, right? What then does your lens and your perspective offer these families, offer these children, offer these beings, offer these parents, if they're able to reconcile what you're offering, essentially?
Yeah, great question. I see it as a new way to really be interacting and relating to yourself and your children in such a way that honors who a child's soul is in such a unique way that they are able to flourish in such freedom, and you're able to create a lot more peace and ease in your family because you have the space to really develop and relate to your child in the way that is right and meaningful and true for you as a family unit, right? And I feel like The word freedom and sovereignty are used a lot, especially in the last few years. And I was kind of pondering this the other day when I was going for a walk. And I was like, part of, to me, sovereignty for children in particular is for them to have the freedom to not just express who they are, but to really show us that there's no right or wrong way to be in a body.
Right.
And to continue nurturing that pathway. And I feel like the children of the new earth are asking for three very specific things. They're asking for a clear way in, which could be termed conscious conception. The second thing is they're looking for a clear place to land in their physical body, so that, they're choosing parents and families and family relational systems that are going to put them in situations and circumstances that are going to honor their developmental freedom, and that they're going to look at different sources and ways of nurturing that child's soul and body. And the third thing is that they're looking for a clear pathway to just be able to walk this earth being who they are, and having the tools and resources to share with children that actually help them stay connected to who they are, that help them nurture their natural gifts and abilities. They're coming in with such different frequencies, and their innate gifts and abilities immediately open and online. And they're needing tools and systems and structures that recognize that, but that also simultaneously give them the freedom to play and express and learn, what does this feel like in my body? What I see the gift that these last 3 years have really given people, if we have so chosen to open our hearts to really see it and accept it, is the sacred return to being in a body and feeling our deep connection to the earth and to whatever term someone wants to use, whether it's source, creator, God, light, whatever word someone wants to insert there. But a sacred return to the body, because I really feel that the bridge to the new reality that we're all creating, that we're a part of in this, some people call it golden age, maybe some people want to call it new earth, or whatever, again, term suits someone, is that the body is the key to all of that. We can't be here without it. It is literally the vehicle and expression for everything we're doing and being and creating and relating. And the way forward is asking us to be in our bodies so that we can partner and relate and collaborate and co-create in these new ways that actually help all of us, not just individual family units, but everyone that's in your sphere or swirl or circle of light, so that it's making a bigger ripple impact. But to return to the body and to stay connected with the soul and understand the miraculous healing power of the body, especially when we're connected in with nature and we've returned to the land and we're in a harmonious balance with that. And biologically, our rhythms, our natural rhythms, and our neurobiology is actually reflected back to us by natural sources that hold the truth and purity of who we are, Mother Nature herself. To me, it's like infinite possibilities can really exist from those places. And so we need to really look at, how do we help this next generation, these future generations coming in, have those healthy foundations to stay connected with their body, stay connected to the source of who they are, so that they do have an understanding of who they are, and so that they feel safe expressing who they are. They have the freedom to be able to do that, and that they're being deeply nourished every step of the way.
That's beautiful. It's There's a lot of there's a lot of freedom fighters on this podcast that are listeners, and I hope you guys are picking up what Allison's putting down, because it's one thing to put on the armor every day, and it's one thing to know that you will fight and die for your children. And one of my mentors recently said, but how many of you are really ready to live for your kids, right? And how many of you are ready to lead and love for your kids?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're offering us, is that in the home and with your children and with these beings that chose to be here, chose you as parents, that were part of this, prenatal energetic force that brought into their, physicality, this calling that was actually a part of our own, whether you want to call it epigenetics, whether you want to call it spirit, whether you want, whatever you want to call it, that it's all part of this grand design. It's all part of this grand infinite intelligence that if you get right before you go to sleep, if you get in those quiet moments reading to your child, if you get the depth of the spiritual nature as to why you guys are at all a family unit, and you allow for them, maybe safeguard them, which is something that I had to learn over the last 3 years. Like we wonder sometimes why my 3-year-old has some challenges, and honestly, I was like, I don't think I protected you guys enough. I didn't know how to kind of protect the energy of my home at the time, because who knew that the war was coming here? Who knew that it was coming straight into our devices, right onto our physical bodies? That's not a mistake, right? Our physical bodies, where we hold these devices and things. And I didn't know how to do that. And so she was exposed to certain things and certain aspects and certain emotions and certain expressions and certain ways that I had to, I don't have any question as to how I navigated, because it's all part of that infinite that infinite wisdom. However, I also recognize that there is cause and effect, and there are some things that she is expressing as a result of it. I say that because I believe what you're sharing is something really important, that if we can drop into that in those quiet moments, or maybe in every moment outside of the fight, every moment outside of the war, because many of you are in it every day in the trench, and you make very clear boundaries, healthy boundaries, between when you're in the fight and when you're in the thick and when you are not. Your children from the inside out will respond in ways that maybe you have been chasing from the outside, ways to help fix them, that it's really got to be something that we embody first, right? It's really got to be something that we have to, yeah.
And something that really helped me navigate these last 3 years was realizing, for me, to be focused on the solutions and creating the new, right? Like creating the new way, so that I was really clear that that was my mission, to create these resources that really, create the new, anchor
That's
the new
awesome.
light here,
Yeah.
so that when people are ready, they're like, oh, yes, thank you. I've been looking exactly for this. Yes, this clicks and it makes sense. Helping my child be in their body, stay connected to, the wisdom of their soul. Yep, that makes sense, right?
Beautiful.
Because
Yeah.
the traditional education systems, like everything's crumbling and moving away for a reason, right? Like there's so much newness emerging, and to really remember our infinite connection to nature as well. Like really getting outside and getting your feet on the ground, getting your feet on the bare earth. depending on where you live, maybe you're able to do that, maybe not, but somehow being in nature every day and allowing her to reflect back to you who you truly are.
It's if any of you who are listening have never studied things like barefoot running, if you haven't looked at grounding or earthing, just do it, right? Just look at like the thermograph readings of the human body as a result of like actually making physical contact with the earth, the exchange of the infinity of electrons that go into your body literally changes not just inflammatory and energy and temperature regulation and those types of things, although it does a very self-regulatory systems in your body just balance out so much better. But if you recognize the EMF, like if you care about EMFs, right? Everybody's all crazy about EMFs and they're all bad and they're having these crazy things and effects on our blood-brain barrier. Yes, they are. And when you're barefoot with the earth, you drop into the EMF patterns of the actual earth and your electromagnetic frequencies, the feelings and emotions of your own body will regulate with a much greater source that you could never replicate with a pad or with any sort of other,
Right.
biohacking device. And so if there's one thing that I would suggest doing as a result of this conversation, and then actually just really maybe even tuning in, in a much deeper way, I think you're going to see a profound transformation if that becomes a habit of yours, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's even to take it one step further than what you were talking about in Brilliant and Barefoot, we talk about a child's footprint of light. So we've heard
Cool.
about the carbon footprint, the carbon food print, things like that. But many people don't know that we all have what's called a footprint of light. And it's the natural soul signature, our codes of our soul that are naturally on the bottom of our foot. So just like how we have fingerprints and toe prints, footprints, there's an energetic signature that's unique to who we are and what our gifts are that are naturally encoded in our soul that get activated when our feet touch our placenta and when we're in utero.
Wow. And
that can also be activated when, we place our feet on the earth as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Alison, how do people connect with you?
Yeah. So the easiest way is my website, which is embodied-brilliance.com. And on there, you'll find information about Brilliant and Barefoot. You'll find information about Embodied Brilliance. There's free gifts to download.
Cool.
You can try samples of the curriculum. And then what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, the truth about developmental milestones, I actually really created a guide called The Truth About Developmental Milestones, a new earth guide to nurture your child's bodily freedom and brilliance. And it helps you recognize the places where you might still be enmeshed or entangled with the traditional way of thinking about your child's development. And it helps you gently and naturally unhook from that and offers some alternative ways or new ways to nurture your child's developmental freedom. And so
awesome.
that can be accessed on the website as well. And that's a digital download that's always available.
And so for everybody who's listening, we'll make sure and have all of the links to your website and all of those different offerings included, because I honestly think that for as much as this may have kind of stretched your comfort zone to some degree, is probably to the same degree that you probably need to understand it more so than ever. I believe that we are at a very critical point where, like you're saying, Alison, is like creating the new is such a, it's becoming a almost like a bromide. Like it's just a phrase at this point, when in reality,
Yeah.
people are just exchanging more of the old with a newer
Mhm.
old paradigm. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's an opportunity for people to understand, maybe even more so, the gravity of today, and also like in maybe more a deeper understanding of what opportunities we have to realize, not just why we're here, but what it is that we're meant to be doing, expressing, and creating at this point. Appreciate
Yes, well said.
Love
And
it.
I really feel like where, because my eye is attuned to children, right? And so where I see that they're asking for our help is where the path of education and the path of parenting intersect.
Yeah.
And that's child development.
I love it. I
And
love it.
child development is asking for a complete rewrite.
Yep. And for those who, I mean, that's the thing. I would say the number one thing, and I've said this for many, I've said this for, it's crazy that I have to say years now, because I've said it very directly for the last 3 years, but it's like in the beginning, it was like everybody was starting to, ask about home birth more so than ever. Right. And then very quickly it was homeschool, and how
Mhm.
quickly they could continually to move out of the system. And in the end, like, many of our parents are looking for creative ways to create, curriculum, or creative ways to actually navigate this process with their kids. And I believe that this is also why you're here, right? And this is also
Definitely.
part of it. And so, Alison, this is awesome. I really
Yeah.
appreciate everything that you shared, and I
Thank
know
you.
that it's going to reverberate through our universe really powerfully. And honestly, I think it's going to almost maybe put into that lock that people feel, right? People feel stuck and they feel locked to some degree. The key that will help them unravel maybe more meaning, more possibility, but definitely more strategies, so that they can actually navigate with their kids so much more powerfully. I really appreciate everything you shared.
My absolute pleasure. Yeah, it's really truly an honor to you know, be able to be here and be present, and may it land with grace, to those who have the eyes and hearts and ears to see it and receive it.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.